All right, time for Refugee Part 11, starting with Yosef. As you recall, his dad kind of went crazy and was stacking all his furniture up in the room, and Yosef's mom accidentally took the sleeping draught, and then Yosef's dad disappeared. What happened was he jumped overboard, and that's right where it left off. So Yosef, outside Savannah Harbor, 1939, 18 days from home. Help! My dad jumped overboard, Yosef cried. Far below him, already a couple hundred yards away from the ship, Yosef's father thrashed crazily in the water. He screamed incoherently, but he wasn't calling out for rescue. On the decks below, passengers ran to the rails and pointed. The ship's siren continued to blow and sailors ran about, but nobody was doing anything. Yosef spun around helplessly. What was he supposed to do? Jump in after his father? It was such a long way down, and he didn't actually know how to swim. Down below on sea deck, one of the Cuban policemen tossed his cap and gun belt aside, kicked off his shoes, and jumped headlong into the green water. He hit the ocean with a slap and a splash, and for many seconds Yosef held his breath, as though he was the diver himself. Yosef's lungs were just about to burst when the man broke the surface a few hundred yards away from where he'd hit, gasping for breath. The man flipped the wet hair out of his face, spun until he had his bearings, and set off swimming after Yosef's father. Yosef's heart raced as fast as his feet as he flew down the stairs. He pushed through the crowds and ran to the rail, but the policeman hadn't reached his father. A woman screamed, and Yosef followed the pointing fingers. 2 shark fins had appeared in the water. Yosef froze in terror. There were more screams as his papa sank beneath the waves, and Yosef had to cling to the rail not to collapse. One of the St. Louis's lifeboats hit the water, and the ship's siren had brought motor launches from the shore, but none of them were going to be in time. The only person close enough to save Yosef's father was a Cuban policeman. Even though the sharks still circled, the policeman took a deep breath and dived beneath the waves. Yosef counted the long seconds before the man broke the surface again, this time with Papa in his arms. The passengers on the ship cheered, but Yosef's father didn't want to be rescued. He struggled in the man's arms, beating and flailing at him. Murderers, he cried, they'll never take me. But Papa was weak, and the policeman was strong. One of the motor launches from the shore reached them first, and the policeman helped the other men lift Yosef's father into the boat. Let me die, Yosef's father cried. The words struck Yosef like slaps in the face, and tears sprang to his eyes. His father would rather die than be with his son, his daughter, his wife. The crack of a pistol shot made Yosef jump. One of the men in the boat stood aiming the gun down in the water near the policeman. Pock, pock. He shot twice more, and one of the shark fins turned away from the policeman to attack the shark the man had wounded with his pistol. The men laid Yosef's father on the bottom of the boat and helped the weary policeman aboard. There were sighs of relief and whispered prayers on the St. Louis, but Yosef's heart lurched when he saw his father kick away the man trying to help him. Papa lunged from the side of the small boat, trying to get back to the sea. Let me die, he cried out again. The policeman grabbed him and pulled him back in the boat. 2 more of the men restrained him, and the boat quickly turned and sped toward the shore. St. Louis's siren stopped blasting, and suddenly it was over. All around Yosef, passengers wept. But Yosef now felt more stunned and sad. His father was gone. In many ways, his father had never really come back from the concentration camp. Not the father Yosef knew and remembered, not the father he loved. He had come back in body, but not in spirit. Yosef's father was gone. His mother was unconscious. His little sister was all by herself. And they would never let Yosef's family into Cuba now, not after his father had gone mad. Yosef and his family would all be sent to Germany, back to the Nazis. Yosef's world was falling apart, and he didn't see any way to put it back together again. Now, on to Isabel, somewhere between the Bahamas and Florida, 1994, 4 days from home. As you remember, her family finally made it to shore, but it was the Bahamas, and they weren't allowed to get off the boat. If they were, they would have been sent back to Cuba. Isabel's mom, who's super pregnant, is sick, and luckily the tourists who they saw in the Bahamas gave them things like aspirin and food. The boat was falling apart. Seams between the sides had cracks on them. The engine rattled on its mounting, constantly weakening the bolts that held it in place. Even the benches were coming loose. Only Castro at the bottom hadn't cracked. He stared up at Isabel, as stern and as confident as ever, commanding her to fight against the impossible and win, one of his slogans. It was hard to fight against the inevitable. The water in the boat was almost to Isabel's knees. She and the others worked sluggishly in the blazing hot Caribbean sun to scoop, pitch. But the water was seeping in as fast as they could bail it. The boat was sinking. Every empty water bottle and gasoline can had been tucked up under a bench to help keep them afloat. But if they didn't reach Florida soon, they were all going to drown. fight against the impossible, and win, Isabel told herself. When are we going to get there? Ivan whined. Manana, Leo said wearily. Manana. Suddenly, Isabel's grandfather stopped bailing water. He sat up straighter. He was looking at something in the distance. Manana, he whispered. Lito? Isabel asked. Her grandfather blinked and his eyes found her again. Was he crying, or is that just sweat and seawater? It's nothing, Cabela. Just a memory, something I haven't thought about in a long time. Isabel's grandfather gazed around the little boat. His eyes suddenly looked sadder. Isabel thought she would have crawled over and hugged him, but there was no room to do it without 3 people getting up and moving for her to get there. Don't stop bailing, Senor Costello told them from where he lay on the bottom of the boat. Maybe you could help, Poppy told him. I'm recovering, Senor Costello argued. I can barely move in the sea. Besides, I don't see you bailing. I'm tending to my wife, Poppy said, who's really sick. Ever since the Bahamas, something had come over Isabel's father. He'd been more attentive to Mommy, more focused on her than anything else. Nobody else noticed, but Isabel did. She'd seen him hold her hand and watch him gently move her hair out of her face and heard him whisper that he loved her, that he needed her. Things she had never seen or heard him do before. Can you say my father is faking it? Louise challenged. I'm just saying it's very nice for him that everybody else is keeping this metal coffin afloat while he sits and relaxes. Poppy said, You wouldn't even have this metal coffin if I hadn't built it. I'm not sure if built is the right word, Senor Costello said, trying to pull the two of the side pieces back together. Cobbled is more like it. Ivan and Senor Costello erupted at the same time. We did the best we could, Ivan yelled. Oh, now you're telling us how to build things? Senor Costello said. Where were you and Luis when we were up all night putting this thing together? You were at your law office, doing God knows what. Isabel shrank in her seat and put her hands over her ears. She hated when her parents argued like this, and now everyone on the boat was mad at each other. I was helping people, Senora Costello told her husband. You never appreciated what I do. And what was I supposed to do? Luis threw in. Tell my police commander that I had to stay home and build a boat so I could escape? All of you stop it, Amara yelled from the back of the boat. Right now, you're acting like children. Everyone felt quiet and looked appropriately chastened. I think it's time for a water break, Amara told them. Isabel, will you hand out the bottles? It was a little earlier than their ration water break, but none of them complained. The clear, delicious water was the best thing Isabel had ever tasted, and it settled them all down like a mother's milk for a baby. We're all hot, and we're all tired, and yes, we're sinking, Amara said. If we lose our heads, we're only going to die faster. We can resolve this. She's right, Isabel's father said. I'm sorry. I'm sorry too, Senor Costello said. I should be helping. Only if you're up to it, Poppy said, and he sounded like he meant it. The boat is falling apart, though, Ivan said. We're taking in too much water. We have too much weight, Senor Costello said. She was right, but what could they lose? There was the engine, the fuel, the food and water, and the 9 of them. What if 2 of us slipped into the water at a time? Poppy suggested. They could hang onto the boat. Floating in the water alongside would help take some of the weight away. But it would drag down on the boat. Slow us down, Louis said. But it might keep the boat afloat longer, Senora Costello said. I think we should try it, Amara said. We'll take turns in the water. It'll keep us cooler, too. And right now, Isabel thought, cooler heads might be just the most important thing of all. All right, now we're on to Mahmoud, who is in the water with his mom, and he found like a dead man floating, and luckily the dead man had a life jacket on that worked, so he took that and put it on his mom. So it's just the 2 of them. Mahmoud was in and out of sleep, waking every few seconds when the waves washed over him. Minutes, hours passed. Mahmoud dreamed a boat was coming for them. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say, this is somewhere in the Mediterranean Sea in 2015, 11 days from home. He could hear the boat's motor in his dreams over the lapping of the waves. Mahmoud jerked awake. He ran a cold, wet hand down his face, trying to focus, and he heard it again, the sound of a motor. He wasn't dreaming, but where was it? The rain had stopped, but it was still dark. He couldn't see the boat, but he could hear it. Here, he cried, here! The sound of the motor still stayed frustratingly, agonizingly away. If only whoever was on the boat could see him. Mahmoud thought. All his life he'd practiced being hidden, unnoticed. Now at last, when he most needed to be seen, he was truly invisible. Mahmoud cried in exhaustion and misery. He wanted to do it all over again. He wanted to go back and stand up for the boy in the alley in Aleppo who was getting beaten up for his bread, to scream and yell and wake the sleeping citizens of Izmir so they could see him and all the other people sleeping in doorways and parks, to tell Bashar al-Assad that his army to go to hell. He wanted to stop being invisible and stand up and fight. But now he would never get a chance to do any of that. It was too late. There was no time. Time. The phone. Mahmoud still had the phone in his pocket. He pulled it out and pushed on the button through this plastic bag. The screen with the clock on it lit up like a beacon in the night. Mahmoud held it over his head and waved it in the dark, screaming and yelling for help. The motor got louder. Mahmoud wept for joy as a boat emerged from the darkness, a real boat this time, not a dinghy. A speedboat with lights and antennas and blue and white stripes on the side, the colors of the Greek flag. A Greek Coast Guard ship, come to save him. He was on the front of the ship, down on his knees with hands clasped in thanks, was Mahmoud's father. Walid was there too, in the back, under a foil thermal blanket, and soon Mahmoud and his mother were out of the water and wrapped in foil blankets too. What little body heat they still had left reflected back on them. Mahmoud's mother was too insensible to speak, so Mahmoud told his father why they had given him Hana away rather than see her drown with them. Mahmoud's father wept, but pulled Mahmoud to him and hugged him. Hana's not with us, but she's alive. I know it, his father told him, because of you, my son. The Greek Coast Guard boat swept through the choppy Mediterranean Sea the rest of the night, pulling more people out of the water. The Coast Guard finally set Mahmoud and his family and all the other refugees down on the island of Lesbos. It was almost 6 o'clock in the morning, and the sky had begun to lighten with the dawn. Mahmoud wasn't sure, but he thought he and his mother had spent more than 2 hours in the water. When they stepped off the boat, Mahmoud's father got down on his hands and knees and kissed the ground and gave thanks to Allah. It was time for morning prayers anyway, and Mahmoud joined him. When they were finished, Mahmoud staggered up the rocky gray shore, squinting at the hills that rose beyond the beach. And he realized they weren't real hills, they were piles and piles of life jackets. There were mountains of them stretching up and down the coast as far as Mahmoud could see. The way Aleppo had its piles of rubble, Lesbos had its piles of life jackets, abandoned by the hundreds of thousands of refugees who had come before them, shutting the vast they no longer needed and moving along the road to somewhere else. There were bodies on the beach, too. People who hadn't survived the sea and the night, who hadn't been found by the Coast Guard in time. Men mostly, but a few women too. A child. Mahmoud's mother rushed the infant, howling Hana's name. Mahmoud hurried after her, horrified, but the child wasn't Hana. It was someone else's baby daughter, her lungs filled with seawater. Mahmoud's mother cried into his shoulder until a Greek man in a uniform moved them away from the body and recorded the infant in a little notebook, tallying the daily dead. Mahmoud staggered away, feeling as numb as if he were in the freezing water again. Mahmoud's mother went to all the other refugees who had landed in the night and were still there, asking each of them if they had seen her little Hana. But none of them had. But with Mahmoud's little sister on, it was gone. It had either reached the island and its passengers had already moved on, or it too had wrecked on the rocks. Mahmoud's mother fell to her knees on the rocky ground and wept. Mahmoud's father held her close and let her cry. Mahmoud felt gutted. It was his fault. Hana might still be with him if he hadn't gotten someone on that boat to take her. Or she might have died during the 2 hours in the water. Either way, they had lost her. Mahmoud, his father said quietly over his sobbing mother, check the other bodies to see if they have any shoes that will fit us. And that's the end of Refugee Part 9.